Hi, sir. My mother has a ring just like yours. The words slipped out, hanging in the air like a thread pulled too tight. For a moment, the cafe noise faded, the clinking of cups, the murmur of voices, swallowed by the weight of silence. Across from her, the man stilled. His fingers curled slightly around the emerald-studded ring, as if shielding it. His expression? Blank. Too blank. But his hesitation spoke louder than words. Why the tension? Why did he look as if she had said something she wasn't supposed to know? And why did she already feel, deep in her bones, that she had just opened a door she could never close? She should look away. She should walk away. But she wouldn't. Not now. Not after this. Some secrets refused to stay buried. Manhattan never slept. Even in the mid-morning hours, the city pulsed with life, cars honking impatiently, hurried footsteps against the pavement, the rhythmic clatter of coffee cups in the small cafe tucked between towering skyscrapers. Ivy Quinn moved with practiced ease, balancing a tray in one hand as she weaved between crowded tables. She had been working at Cafe Verona for over 2 years now, long enough to recognize the regulars, long enough to know which customers liked their coffee extra hot, and which ones barely glanced up from their phones before leaving a rushed tip. She wasn't meant to be here forever. Being a waitress was just a way to pay rent between long shifts at the hospital, where she worked as a night shift nurse. It was exhausting, too little sleep, too many double shifts, but she had never had the luxury of an easy life. And yet, at this very moment, standing in the middle of the cafe with a fresh cup of espresso in her hand, she felt the weight of something far heavier than exhaustion. She was staring at a ring. A deep green emerald, polished to perfection, gleamed against the light as the man across the cafe casually rested his hand on the table. But it wasn't just the gemstone that caught her attention, it was the intricate gold band wrapped around it, designed like delicate vines curling around the stone. Ivy knew that ring. She had seen it before, buried in an old, faded photograph, tucked away in her mother's worn-out keepsake box. It had belonged to Margaret Maggie Quinn, her mother. Her heart pounded as she stepped forward, barely aware of herself moving until she was standing right in front of the man. And then, without thinking, the words left her lips. "Hi, sir. My mother has a ring just like yours." The moment the sentence was spoken, the energy in the cafe shifted. The man across from her, early 30s, dark tailored suit, sharp jawline, froze. His fingers, which had been idly tracing the rim of his coffee cup, suddenly stilled. His other hand, the one wearing the ring, twitched ever so slightly before curling around the emerald-studded band. Ivy wasn't sure why, but she felt it, the tension. His eyes lifted to hers, sharp and assessing, scanning her face as if searching for something. The background noise of the cafe, the clinking of cups, the murmur of conversation, faded into a dull hum. "Excuse me." His voice was controlled, but there was something beneath it. Something off. Ivy swallowed. "The ring," she said, nodding toward his hand. "My mother has one just like it." A long pause. Too long. The man, whoever he was, didn't move, didn't blink. The only shift in his expression was the tightening of his jaw. "That's impossible." His tone was cool, almost dismissive, but the sharpness in his gaze told a different story. Ivy frowned. "I don't think so." She had spent her entire life piecing together fragments of the past, stories her mother refused to tell, names left unspoken, memories wrapped in secrecy. She had learned to trust her instincts. And right now, her instincts were screaming. "Where did she get it?" he asked, his voice even. I don't know." She hesitated. "But I have a picture of her wearing it." Something flickered across his face, too quick to catch, but unmistakable. Then, in a move so fluid it seemed rehearsed, he leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping once against the table. "Bring it to me." Ivy blinked. "What?" "The picture," he repeated, his tone firm. "I want to see it." Ivy hesitated. Who was this man? And why did he care? "Come to my office," he continued, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a sleek black business card. He slid it across the table toward her. "Wilder Global Tower. Tomorrow." She stared at the card. "Knox Wilder. CEO, Wilder International." Her throat went dry. She had heard of him before, of course she had. His name was splashed across business magazines, his face on Forbes' top 30 under 30, before he had even turned 25. Knox Wilder was one of the youngest billionaires in the country, running an empire passed down through generations. And yet, here he was, sitting in a small cafe, looking at her like she had just shattered something fragile. The emerald ring still gleamed on his finger. Ivy didn't know what she had just stepped into. But something told her that this was only the beginning. The glass doors of Wilder Global Tower loomed before her, sleek and imposing, reflecting the steel and glass skyline of Manhattan. Ivy hesitated at the entrance, gripping the strap of her bag tightly. She had spent her life navigating hospitals, cramped apartments, and noisy diners, never in spaces like this. Inside, the lobby was an architectural masterpiece. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a grand chandelier hanging from the vaulted ceiling. Businessmen in tailored suits walked past her without a second glance, their conversations crisp and efficient. She felt wildly out of place. But she hadn't come this far to back down. Adjusting her posture, she approached the receptionist. "Ivy Quinn," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I have a meeting with Knox Wilder." The woman barely glanced up, tapping swiftly on her keyboard before nodding. "Mr. Wilder is expecting you. Take the private elevator to the top floor." Ivy exhaled slowly as she stepped into the elevator. The doors slid shut, sealing her inside. She felt her heart hammer against her ribs as the numbers ascended, 20, 30, 40. Then, with a smooth chime, the doors opened. The top floor was a different world. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan. The air smelled like expensive cologne and fresh coffee. At the center of the vast office, behind an ebony desk, sat Knox Wilder. He looked up as she entered, eyes flicking immediately to the manila envelope clutched in her hand. "You brought the photo." His voice was steady, but there was a sharpness beneath it. Ivy nodded, crossing the room and placing the envelope on his desk. She sat opposite him, feeling the weight of his gaze as he reached for it. For a moment, he hesitated. Then, with careful precision, he slid the photograph out. The reaction was instant. Knox's posture stiffened, his grip tightening on the paper. His usual composed demeanor fractured, just for a second, but Ivy caught it. His gaze locked onto the image, as if the world had tilted beneath him. "Where did you get this?" His voice had dropped, quieter now. Ivy swallowed. "It was in my mother's things." "That's her. Margaret Quinn. But she used to go by Maggie." Knox didn't respond. He was staring at the photo like it held the answer to a question he didn't want to ask. The picture was old, slightly faded, but the details were unmistakable. A young woman, Maggie Quinn, stood on the deck of a luxurious yacht. Wind tousled her dark curls, and a carefree smile graced her face. But it wasn't just her presence that made Knox's grip tighten. It was what she was wearing. On her right hand, glinting in the sunlight, was the ring. The Wilder family's emerald ring. A ring that should not have been on her hand. Knox exhaled, leaning back. This was taken on the Wilder family yacht. His voice was unreadable. 1992. Ivy's breath caught. Are you sure? I know that yacht, he said simply. His mind was already moving, calculating, dissecting. The yacht in the photograph belonged to his father, Theo Wilder. It had been the setting of countless lavish summer parties, exclusive to the elite. But Maggie Quinn? She didn't belong in that world. Unless... Do you recognize her? Ivy pressed. Knox didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for the intercom and pressed a button. Leo, get in here. A minute later, the door opened and an older man in his late 60s entered. Leonard Leo Bennett, longtime Wilder family confidant and former assistant to Theo Wilder. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, and though his posture was straight, there was a weight in his eyes that spoke of secrets buried deep. You called, sir. Leo addressed Knox, but his gaze flickered to Ivy, curiosity in his expression. Knox slid the photograph across the desk. Look at this. Leo took the picture. The moment his eyes landed on it, his breath hitched. His grip trembled, almost imperceptibly, but Knox saw it. For a long moment, Leo didn't speak. Then, finally, in a voice rough with something Ivy couldn't quite name, he whispered, "My God." He lifted his gaze, locking eyes with Knox. Where did you get this? Miss Quinn here says that's her mother. Knox's voice was razor sharp. Margaret Quinn. But she used to go by Maggie. Leo's expression changed. The color drained from his face, his mouth parting slightly before he pressed his lips into a firm line. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. You knew her, Knox said, not a question, but a statement. Leo didn't answer. Leo. Knox's tone darkened. Finally, Leo exhaled. His shoulders sagged slightly, as if the weight of an old burden had just settled on him again. She worked for us, he admitted quietly. Ivy's pulse quickened. Worked for you? Leo nodded. Summer of 1992. She was hired as a stewardess on the Wilder yacht. Ivy felt her hands clench into fists. Why didn't she ever talk about it? Leo hesitated. His gaze flickered between Ivy and Knox before he said, almost reluctantly, because she left that world. And never looked back. The words sent a chill through Ivy's spine. She had spent her entire life wondering about the man her mother never spoke of. The empty space where a father should have been. And now, standing in this room, she felt closer than ever to an answer that Knox Wilder might not want her to find. Knox studied Leo, his expression unreadable. There's more to this, isn't there? He asked. Leo held his gaze for a long moment before exhaling. Yes. Silence. Then Knox leaned forward, fingers steepled under his chin. Tell us everything. Leo's words still lingered in the air. She worked for us. Ivy barely heard anything else after that. The revelation wrapped around her like a vice, tightening with every breath she took. Her mother had been on that yacht. She had been a part of the Wilder family's world, a world she had never spoken about. But why? And why had she left it behind so suddenly? Knox, who had been unnervingly silent since Leo's confession, finally spoke. His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. If Maggie worked for my father, there has to be a record of it. He turned to Leo. The yacht logs. They kept a journal of every staff member, every guest. Where are they? Leo hesitated. A flicker of something crossed his face, uncertainty, maybe even guilt. They should still be in the company archives, he admitted. Knox didn't wait for more. He pushed back from his desk, already reaching for his phone. Then let's find them. The Wilder International Archives weren't stored in some dusty old filing room. No, they were meticulously catalogued, secured in a temperature-controlled vault beneath the corporate headquarters. Knox led the way, his pace quick, his jaw tight. Ivy followed closely behind, nerves humming under her skin. Leo trailed after them, his silence heavier than before. They entered a sleek, glass-enclosed records room where a handful of staff worked in hushed efficiency. Knox strode up to the head archivist. "I need the Wilder yacht logs from 1992 to 1995. The request was met with a surprised blink. "That might take some time, Mr. Wilder. Those records haven't been accessed in years." "Then start now," Knox interrupted, his voice brokering no argument. The archivist nodded quickly and disappeared into the aisles of file cabinets. Minutes stretched into an hour. Ivy fidgeted, arms crossed, as she watched staff members sift through boxes and binders. The longer they searched, the more she felt the weight of what they might find pressing down on her. Then, finally, "Here," the archivist called. A large leather-bound journal was placed on the sleek black table before them. The Wilder yacht log. Knox wasted no time flipping through the pages, scanning names, dates, and notes written in elegant script. Then, there. He tapped a page, his brows furrowing. Ivy leaned in. "Margaret, Maggie Quinn, stewardess, summer of 1992. Her breath hitched. It was real. Her mother had been on that yacht. Knox turned another page, his fingers moving faster now, skimming through entries. Then, something else caught his eye. A note. August 4, 1995, Staff Guest Report. Incident. Wilder family emerald ring reported missing during guest event. Status, recovered. Located by Maggie Quinn. Maggie Quinn resigned unexpectedly the following day. Ivy's pulse pounded. She left right after finding the ring, she murmured. Knox's jaw tightened. And never spoke about it again. Leo, who had remained silent, suddenly let out a breath, one that sounded almost like defeat. "What aren't you telling us, Leo?" Knox demanded. The older man didn't look at him. Instead, he looked at Ivy. "Your mother was a good woman," he said quietly. "She was kind. Smart. She didn't belong in that world, and she knew it." Ivy's throat tightened. "Then why was she there?" Leo hesitated, then exhaled. "Because Theo wanted her to be." Silence. Knox stilled. Ivy swore she felt the air shift, as if an invisible wall had just cracked between them. "What are you saying?" Knox's voice was low, controlled. Leo met his gaze. "I'm saying Maggie wasn't just some stewardess on the yacht. She and Theo. They were close." Ivy's stomach dropped. "Close," she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. Leo didn't look away. "Your mother and Theo Wilder had a relationship." The words slammed into Ivy like a physical force. Her entire life, she had never known the identity of her father. Her mother had refused to speak about it, dismissing every question, with a gentle, but firm "some things are better left in the past." Now, standing here in the archives of one of the most powerful families in America, she was staring at the past she had never been allowed to know. She turned to Knox, her mind spinning. "If that's true, then your father." Knox's expression was unreadable. His grip on the yacht log was white-knuckled, his jaw set in a way that told her he was processing this just as much as she was. Finally, he spoke. "We need to get a DNA test." Ivy swallowed hard. She had come looking for answers. But was she ready for the truth? The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the small, dimly lit clinic. Ivy sat on the examination table, Her hands clenched into fists as she watched the nurse carefully seal the DNA samples, one from her, one from Knox. It felt surreal. A few days ago, she had been nothing more than a nurse and a part-time waitress, struggling to piece together fragments of a past her mother had left behind. Now, she was sitting in a lab, preparing to uncover a truth that could change everything. Knox, standing beside her, was unusually silent. His expression was unreadable, but she could sense the tension in the way he held himself, rigid, unmoving. "Once we send this in, there's no going back," he murmured. Ivy took a shaky breath. "I know." She had spent her entire life without a father. She wasn't sure what scared her more, finding out Theo Wilder was not her father, or finding out that he was. The nurse handed Knox a sealed envelope containing the samples. "You can personally drop this off at the lab, Mr. Wilder," she said. "That way, there's no risk of tampering." "Thank you," Knox said curtly. Ivy exhaled, feeling a fraction of relief. The hardest part was over. Now, all they had to do was wait. Or so she thought. Ivy barely had time to process the weight of the upcoming results before everything spiraled out of control. That night, she came home to chaos. Her apartment door was slightly ajar. At first, she thought she had left it unlocked, a careless mistake after an exhausting day. But the moment she stepped inside, she knew. Someone had been here. The living room was a mess, cushions thrown to the floor, drawers yanked open, papers scattered everywhere. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she rushed to her bedroom. The first thing she saw was the overturned nightstand. The second thing, her closet door, wide open, clothes tossed around carelessly. And then, the final blow. The envelope. The sealed DNA samples that Knox had given her for safekeeping were gone. Her breath caught in her throat. No. No, no, no. She scrambled through the mess, checking every drawer, every possible place it could have fallen. But deep down, she already knew. Someone had come for one reason only. To erase the truth. Knox arrived within 20 minutes. When he walked in, his entire body went rigid at the sight of the wreckage. His jaw clenched, his hands curling into fists. "Are you hurt?" His voice was controlled, but there was a dangerous edge beneath it. Ivy shook her head. "I wasn't home." Knox exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. He was still in his crisp, tailored suit, but his composed billionaire persona was slipping. He looked furious. "They took the DNA samples," she whispered. Something flashed in his eyes, dark, unreadable. "Who the hell would do this?" Ivy demanded. "Why would anyone care about a stupid DNA test?" Knox didn't answer immediately. He turned, running a hand through his hair, his movements sharp with tension. "Because if you're really Theo Wilder's daughter," he finally said, "it changes everything." Ivy's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "The Wilder family empire isn't just built on money. It's built on legacy, on bloodlines." His voice was tight. "If you're Theo's daughter, you have a legal right to a portion of his estate. His shares in Wilder International. His legacy." Ivy blinked, trying to process. "But I don't care about any of that." Knox let out a humorless laugh. "Maybe you don't. But someone in my family clearly does." The weight of his words settled over them like a dark cloud. Someone in the Wilder family didn't want Ivy to be recognized. Someone was willing to break into her home to make sure the truth never saw the light of day. Ivy felt a shiver run down her spine. "So what now?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Knox met her gaze, his blue eyes cold and calculating. "Now?" He straightened, his entire demeanor shifting from shocked to dangerous. Now we find out who's trying to bury this secret. Ivy barely slept after the break-in. Every sound outside her window, every shadow in the hallway felt like a threat waiting to strike again. She wanted to believe this was just about money. Just about inheritance. But something in the pit of her stomach told her it was more than that. And Knox. He wasn't letting this go. The morning after the break-in, she met him at his private office in Wilder Global Tower. The city stretched behind him through the massive glass windows, but his entire focus was on the files in front of him. "We're doing this another way," he said, his voice tight. Ivy crossed her arms. "And what way is that?" Knox exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "I had my father's old medical records pulled." Ivy frowned. "Medical records? Why?" "Because hospitals keep DNA samples," Knox said simply. "Blood tests, surgeries, it's all archived." Her breath caught. "You mean?" "I had a contact retrieve an old blood sample from one of my father's hospital visits," he confirmed. "We don't need the stolen test. We can run a new one. And this time, I'll make sure it's untouchable." Ivy swallowed hard. This was it. The final step to uncovering the truth. 3 days later, the results arrived. Ivy sat in Knox's office, heart pounding as he ripped open the envelope. His eyes scanned the document, his usual mask of control slipping for a brief second. Then, he placed the paper on the desk and looked up at her. "It's confirmed." The words felt unreal. "You're his daughter." Ivy felt her breath hitch. She had spent 32 years wondering who her father was. Wondering why he had never been in her life. And now, the answer was right there, printed in cold, clinical certainty. Theo Wilder wasn't just some distant, untouchable figure. He was her blood. Her family. And yet, before she could even begin to process it, the world reminded her exactly what kind of family she had just stepped into. That evening, when Ivy arrived home, she found an envelope taped to her door. No name. No return address. Just a single white envelope. Hands shaking, she opened it. Inside was a single slip of paper. A message, typed in bold black ink. "Knowing too much is never a good thing. You don't belong in the Wilder family." Ivy's breath caught. Her fingers tightened around the paper as a chill crawled down her spine. This wasn't just about inheritance. This was a warning. The next morning, Knox received a text. It was short. Untraceable. "She is not a Wilder. If you continue, your family will fall apart." Knox clenched his jaw, gripping his phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. Someone was watching. Someone was waiting. And someone was willing to do whatever it took to erase Ivy from the Wilder legacy. Knox was no stranger to power struggles. The Wilder family empire had always been filled with secrets, deals, and unspoken threats. But this wasn't just about keeping Ivy out. This was about protecting something, or someone. "Whoever did this isn't just trying to stop you," Knox said, pacing his office. "They're afraid of what will happen if the truth comes out." Ivy exhaled sharply. "Then we need to find out why." Knox turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Are you ready for that?" She met his gaze, her determination solidifying. "I've spent my whole life in the dark," she said. "I'm done being afraid." Knox's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then let's end this." Whoever was behind this, whoever was manipulating the Wilder family from the shadows. They were about to find out exactly how far Ivy Quinn was willing to go. The moment the DNA results were confirmed, Ivy thought the worst was over. She was wrong. The real battle had only just begun. It took less than 24 hours for the Wilder International boardroom to turn into a war zone. The official announcement had not even been made, but somehow, the information had already spread through the highest circles of the company. Whispers in the hallways. Nervous glances from executives. The tension in the air was thick enough to suffocate. When Knox entered the boardroom that morning, they were waiting for him. The long mahogany table was filled with the most powerful figures in the company, shareholders, senior executives, and at the head of it all, Raymond Ray Wilder. Knox barely took his seat before the attack began. "This is unacceptable." The voice was sharp, clipped with controlled fury. It belonged to Robert Sinclair, one of the oldest board members. "You can't expect us to sit back and allow some unknown woman to claim a stake in this company." Knox leaned back, his expression unreadable. "She's not just some unknown woman. She's my sister." Sinclair scoffed. "That's what the test says. That doesn't mean we have to acknowledge it." Another voice cut in, Marion Dalton, one of the few female executives. "If this goes public, we risk major instability among investors. Wilder International thrives on its legacy. If an illegitimate child suddenly emerges..." "Half-sister," Knox corrected coldly. "It doesn't matter." Dalton snapped. "She was never meant to be a Wilder. That was Theo's choice." Knox clenched his jaw. He could feel the fight boiling beneath his skin, but before he could respond, another voice echoed through the room. A voice he hadn't expected. "Enough." The boardroom fell silent as Vivian Wilder stepped forward. Vivian Wilder was a woman who commanded attention without needing to raise her voice. Even now, in her early 60s, she held herself with the poise of a queen. Dressed in an elegant navy suit, her hair swept into a flawless chignon, she looked exactly like what she was, the matriarch of the Wilder dynasty. Ivy had never met her before. But she had felt her presence long before this moment. Vivian exhaled slowly, then turned her gaze toward Knox. "Sit down, Knox." Her voice was smooth, almost gentle. But Knox didn't sit. "You knew." His tone was colder than Ivy had ever heard. Vivian met his gaze without flinching. "Yes." Ivy's breath caught. "You knew about me," she whispered. Vivian finally turned to her, studying her with eyes so much like Knox's it made Ivy's stomach turn. "I knew," she admitted. "For how long?" Knox demanded. Vivian hesitated. Then, softly, too softly, she said, "Since before you were born." A heavy silence fell over the room. Ivy felt like the ground had just been ripped from under her. "You knew my mother was pregnant. And you said nothing." Vivian's expression didn't change. "I did what was necessary to protect this family." Knox's hands curled into fists. "Don't give me that bullshit." "What did you do?" Vivian exhaled, glancing at the board members. For the first time, there was something almost vulnerable in her eyes. Then, she turned back to Knox. "I burned the letters." The words landed like a bomb. Ivy's stomach twisted. "What letters?" she whispered. Vivian's voice remained calm, but her fingers curled slightly at her side. "Your father wrote to Maggie. He wanted to see her again. He wanted to know if she was all right. He wanted a chance." Knox inhaled sharply. "And you destroyed them." Vivian nodded once. "You had no right." Ivy's voice cracked. Vivian's expression finally flickered, just for a second. "I had every right." "Why?" Knox demanded. Vivian turned to her son. "Because Theo was married. Because he had a family. And because one mistake, one fleeting moment, was not going to destroy everything he built." Ivy felt sick. She had spent her entire life believing her father didn't want her. But now she had to live with the truth. He never even had the chance. Knox barely had time to process his mother's confession before another voice spoke. Deep. Cold. Calculated. It doesn't matter now. All eyes turned to Raymond Ray Wilder as he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled together. He looked utterly unbothered by the chaos unfolding around him. Knox's eyes narrowed. You? Ray smiled. Me? Ivy felt a shiver crawl up her spine. She had barely paid attention to this man until now, but something about him felt wrong. You sent the threats, Knox said, voice deadly calm. Ray didn't even flinch. Of course I did. The boardroom went still. Ivy's breath caught. You admit it, she whispered. Ray shrugged. Why wouldn't I? It was necessary. Knox took a step closer, his jaw tight. You broke into her apartment. You stole the DNA test. You tried to scare her away. Ray's smile never wavered. And yet, here she is. He glanced at Ivy. Persistent little thing, aren't you? She clenched her fists. Why? She demanded. Ray sighed, as if this were an inconvenience rather than a serious accusation. Because if you're legally acknowledged as Theo's daughter, you get a percentage of Wilder International. And if you get a percentage, that disrupts everything. Knox's jaw locked. This isn't about money. This is about control. Ray's smile finally faded. Yes. And there it was. The truth. Ray had spent years solidifying his influence within Wilder International. He had pulled strings, made backdoor deals, ensured that when Theo was gone, he was the one who held the power. Ivy's existence threatened all of that. So what now? She asked, her voice low. Ray studied her for a moment. Then, slowly, he leaned forward. Now? His smile returned, colder this time. Now we see how much of a Wilder you really are. The Wilder family had spent 3 decades burying secrets. Now, Ivy was about to dig them up for the world to see. You need to go public. Knox's voice was firm, but Ivy heard the concern laced beneath it. They stood in his office, the weight of the past few weeks pressing down on them. Ivy crossed her arms. Absolutely not. It's the only way to protect you, Knox argued. If the media gets hold of this story before Ray can spin it, you'll have public support. He won't be able to make you disappear quietly. Ivy scoffed. I don't want to be some billionaire family's dirty little scandal. Knox exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. This isn't just about you anymore, Ivy. It's about stopping Ray before he destroys anyone else. She swallowed hard. She hated that he was right. Ray had already proven how far he was willing to go, threats, break INS, manipulating the board to erase her existence. If she walked away now, he would win. And Ivy Quinn was not the type to back down. She didn't have to wait long for Ray's next move. That night, as she left her shift at the hospital, a sleek black car pulled up beside her. The tinted window rolled down, revealing the man himself. Get in. Ivy stared at him. Not a chance. Ray smirked. Then let's talk here. She didn't move. You've made quite a mess, Ms. Quinn, he continued smoothly. Stirring up old ghosts. Poking your nose where it doesn't belong. Ivy squared her shoulders. It's my past, Ray. My family. You don't get to decide what I know. His expression hardened. You think exposing this will give you justice? That the world will suddenly care about some illegitimate child trying to stake a claim? I don't want your money. Then what do you want? He asked, voice edged with mockery. Ivy met his gaze, unwavering. I want you to pay for what you've done. Ray's smirk returned, but this time, it was colder. Be careful what you wish for. The car door clicked shut, and the vehicle pulled away, leaving her standing alone in the dimly lit parking lot. Her hands trembled. Not from fear. From fury. Ray Wilder had spent 32 years controlling this family. It was time to tear down his empire. Ivy filed the lawsuit the next morning. Charges: corporate fraud, manipulating company records to conceal Theo Wilder's affairs. Financial misconduct, funneling assets to maintain control over Wilder International. Intimidation, coercion, using threats to silence those who opposed him. The moment the news hit the press, chaos erupted. Headlines splashed across every major network. Wilder scandal. Secret daughter sues for justice. Illegitimate Wilder heir takes on billionaire family. Ray Wilder accused of corporate fraud, will he fall? Wilder International's stock dipped. Investors demanded answers. And most importantly, Ray's power began to crack. The board of Wilder International turned against him within days. Not out of morality. Not out of justice. But because he was bad for business. Knox was the one who delivered the final blow. At the next board meeting, he stood before the room, the same room where they had once fought to erase Ivy, and placed a thick folder on the table. Inside this file is enough evidence to prove that Ray Wilder has manipulated company funds, falsified records, and actively sabotaged the future of this company for his own gain. A murmur rippled through the board. Ray's face was unreadable. You wanted to control everything, Uncle, Knox continued, voice calm. But now, you've lost it all. A silence stretched. Then, the vote. Ray Wilder, officially removed from the Wilder International Board of Directors. All assets frozen pending further investigation. For the first time in his life, Ray Wilder was powerless. As he stood to leave, he cast one last glance at Ivy. You have no idea what you've started. Ivy held his gaze. Oh, I think I do. After everything, the threats, the lawsuit, the truth, Ivy found herself standing in Knox's office once again. It's done, he said, watching her carefully. Ray's gone. You have a legal right to the Wilder name now. Ivy stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she shook her head. I don't want it. Knox's brow furrowed. What? I don't want the money. The shares. The name. She exhaled, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. I didn't fight for a seat at their table, Knox. I fought because it was the right thing to do. He studied her, something like respect flickering in his eyes. Then what do you want? He asked. Ivy smiled. I want to build something that actually matters. And so, using the settlement money, Ivy founded the Wilder Foundation, a scholarship program for underprivileged medical students. A legacy not built on wealth and power, but on opportunity and change. The Manhattan skyline stretched across the horizon, bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun. The water beneath them shimmered, reflecting the city lights as evening settled in. Ivy stood at the edge of the yacht's deck, her hands resting on the railing, letting the cool breeze brush against her skin. It was the same yacht, the one from the photograph, the one that had set everything in motion. But this time, she wasn't here as an outsider chasing the past. She was here because she chose to be. Footsteps approached from behind. You're staring at the city like it's about to disappear. She smirked. Just thinking. Knox stepped beside her, casually leaning against the railing. He had ditched his usual suit, dressed instead in a simple black, button-down with the sleeves rolled up. It was one of the rare times he didn't look like the CEO of a billion-dollar empire, just a man enjoying the night. Dangerous habit, he teased. Ivy chuckled softly, then turned to face him. Do you ever wonder, she began, her voice quieter now, if things had been different? If our father had made another choice? What would your life have looked like? Knox was silent for a moment, as if considering it. Then, he sighed dramatically. I probably wouldn't have a pain in the ass sister who challenges me at every turn. Ivy gasped, shoving his shoulder playfully. I knew you only tolerated me. Knox grinned, rubbing his arm as if she had actually hurt him. To be fair, you did make my life significantly more complicated. Oh, please. You love it. His smirk softened into something more genuine. Yeah, he admitted. I do. Ivy felt something warm settle in her chest. She had fought so hard for the truth, for justice. But what she had found in the end was something she never expected. A family. Not because of a last name. Not because of blood. But because they had chosen each other. The wind picked up slightly, rustling through her hair. She turned back to the skyline, inhaling the crisp evening air. You're really not taking the Wilder name? Knox asked after a beat. Ivy shook her head. Nope. Not even a little tempted. She smirked. I think one Wilder in this family is more than enough, don't you? Knox laughed, shaking his head. You're impossible, Ivy Quinn. And yet, you keep me around. Unfortunately. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the city lights flickered to life. Finally, Knox nudged her lightly. Come on, sis, he said, testing the word. Let's head inside before you get all emotional on me. Ivy rolled her eyes but followed him, a smile tugging at her lips. For the first time in her life, she wasn't searching for where she belonged. She had already found it. And she wasn't letting it go. Ivy had spent her whole life searching. For answers. For belonging. For a truth that had always been just out of reach. And in the end, she had found something far more valuable. Not a last name. Not an inheritance. But a family. Not because of blood. Not because of obligation. But because they had chosen each other. She had fought against lies, against threats, against those who tried to silence her. She had uncovered secrets buried for decades. And when the world had tried to tell her she didn't belong, she had stood her ground and proved them wrong. Ivy Quinn was never meant to be a Wilder. And yet, she had become something more. She had become part of something real. Because in the end, family wasn't about DNA. It was about trust. About standing beside each other, even when the world turned against you. It was about the people who saw you for who you were, and chose to stay. And that was a legacy worth keeping.